You're in Los Angeles. This is where it all started. We knew of you when you were taking a stand. It wasn't a political stand. It was against the lunacy that was being imposed. And it was part of, I think of it as the war on science, the war on reality, calling this virus all the horrific things that they called it, coming up with mandates that were completely ludicrous. And then you had the white coat summit on the Supreme Court steps. What was it that triggered your just having to speak out?
Right. Yes, so I have been living in Los Angeles for a long time, more than 20 years, married, 2 kids. My kids went through the Beverly Hills school system, very much, this was my life for sure. Working full-time as an emergency physician. For those of you who don't know or remember, I'm also an attorney, and that's relevant because when 2020 came, what I was seeing was really defied all medical reality and threatened the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, like nothing I'd ever seen. So I became known for the medical, and that has been my career over the past 25 years. But the truth is, I was motivated because of the assault on our Bill of Rights. As a lawyer watching what was happening, what was going on was flagrantly illegal. There were a lot of specific examples I could give you. I was working in the ER at the time, and in April of 2020, all California doctors received a letter in the mail that if they prescribed hydroxychloroquine, they could lose their medical license. So just take a step back and think about that. I'm a doctor for 25 years. I'm also a lawyer, and I know how this works. You can't tell a doctor that they can't prescribe an FDA medication. That's just actually not a category of things you can do. So I got this letter, and I was so horrified that our government was getting involved in this. So the first thing I did is I asked my peers, well, what did you think about this letter? And they were kind of shrugging their shoulders. I was stunned. I would say that's actually what activated me to go public. Prior to that, I just did what I could for each patient. But that really woke me up. I was very scared for America.
Yeah. So this incredibly anti-medical, anti-health, counter to the Hippocratic Oath, by the way, plus a silencing of free speech was happening, but you already saw your peers, as you say, complacent. So one of the things you talk about in your book is that so many of the foundational aspects of the horrors that we lived through had already been in place. Was this one of them that people felt it was as if already the groundwork had been laid for people to be cowed already?
So the COVID years revealed so much about what's wrong. Like this didn't just come overnight. It wasn't just one event. It could never have happened like this if it was just a singular problem. There were so many things that we saw. We saw that the doctors were complacent, but how did doctors get complacent? My father was a doctor. I grew up in the world of medicine. Doctors didn't used to be like that. Medical training has taught doctors to just go along, get promoted. Very much you had to fall into line. Normally, and so that was medical training. Once you were out as a practicing physician, you really had a lot of protocols you had to comply with. So I was a hospital physician, as an ER physician, and there were, every year, endless protocols. It was different. I was the exact right age to see how medicine kind of flipped. I started practicing like in the 2000s. From 2000 to 2020, medicine really, really changed. It changed starting in the 90s, but really, we were getting protocols in the ER, do a checklist. And I'll give you a specific example. If somebody came into the emergency department and their temperature was high, or their respiratory rate was high, or their heart rate was high, that could be a sign of sepsis. But it also could be a sign of dehydration, anxiety, stress, a drug effect. There's a lot of other reasons. It's not just sepsis, right? But the government had put up protocols that if your vital signs were off a little bit, you had to start antibiotics, or you had to document or chart why you didn't, and you had to do that within 1 hour. Well, if you've ever been to an ER, to get anything done within an hour, you practically need an act of God. It's not going to happen. So if you didn't put someone on antibiotics, you heard about it, and you got into trouble, and you were dinged by the system. So I used to fight that as much as I could. But at some point, you kind of start giving in. You're like, oh my God, leave me alone. I'm just going to give the antibiotics. So all throughout my career, this was getting worse and worse and worse, the protocolization of medicine. And I used to say, you don't need a doctor. You could just have a checklist. You don't really need a doctor. So that's kind of what happened in the medical space, and it had been building up really for 30 years, I would say, I had been getting there. But it was still extremely shocking to me that when push came to shove, at that exact moment of helping the patient right in front of you, The doctors did not hold the line. They did not hold the line. If you think your doctor did, you're probably wrong. Not 100% of you, but most of you are wrong. So I saw the doctors not do the right thing, and I had never experienced that in my career. That concerned me as an American, as a citizen. I'm a Jew, as a Jewish person. How do you not value life, right? So I got very, very, very alarmed from the medical, that I was watching doctors actually not help patients. That had never happened. The public health officials were saying to people, stay home until you turn blue. And at an intellectual level, everything that the public health department was saying was contrary to everything you learned in public health. So in Public Health 101, you open up any textbook written before 2020, you don't do a vaccination in the middle of a respiratory pandemic. It's actually against the rules. It actually makes it worse. So that's well known. Any public health textbook prior to 2020 says that. Another basic obvious fact, SARS-CoV-2 virus is 0.1 micron size, which is 1/1000th of a hair. It's unbelievably small. What a joke it is to say that a piece of cloth or paper could possibly keep out a virus. So the doctors knew this. They knew this, and they were complying. It was outrageous.
Yeah.
So I was seeing a lot of things. Another big clue, everybody knows that, hydroxychloroquine, everyone in this room, 5 years ago, you had never heard the word hydroxychloroquine. Now everybody's an expert. So we doctors would talk about it, and I'm a geek, I guess. I was sort of excited. This was an emergency. I'm an emergency doctor. Wow, this is exciting. I wasn't really scared of the whole thing. This is what I trained for. So I was reading about all the studies across the world that showed hydroxychloroquine would work, and I was pretty stoked about it. And then the doctors really didn't care. And then when it became politicized, which was I think March 17th or something, when Trump talked about it, all of a sudden the doctors themselves became poisoned against it. And I remember being shocked that the doctors' opinions were changing because of Facebook and Twitter. I thought that was very odd. I just thought it was very strange, though, that that's how doctors were making decisions. And I remember thinking, why would anybody pay a doctor? If you just need to go to Facebook. I mean, it was bizarre to me. It was actually just bizarre. Yeah. And then I would go in and I would talk to my peers, and now that we're 5 years out, we can talk about things that were harder to understand. My reality was, in March, I was having kind of intellectual discussions with doctors and saying, what do you think about hydroxychloroquine? And my peers who were not reading the science from across the world, which showed it worked, like in Italy and in, honestly, Saudi Arabia, China, all over the world, France, it was working. And my peers hadn't read the studies, and they're like, oh, I don't know, whatever. That was their interest level. And then the thing became politicized, and all of a sudden, my peers were saying, oh my God, don't touch it, you're gonna have a heart rhythm problem. And I was like, what are you talking about? They said, well, I don't think it works. And I said, you're supposed to be a doctor, you're supposed to understand safety and efficacy are not the same concept. Do you want to talk about if it works or not? Great, let's have a debate. I'll show you all the studies that show. But what we can't do is talk about it not being safe. It's been FDA approved for 65 years. Are you joking? So I was having these kinds of conversations with doctors, and I was floored, and I was highly alarmed at the level of, it's somewhere between complacency and cowardice that the doctors had. It's still a heartbreaking thing to think about. I really thought being a doctor was so special. I was raised to think being a doctor was one of the most special things you could do with your life.
Well, if you value life, what better thing, right?
Yeah.
Healing and dealing with the individual, as you note in front of you. There were a couple stories in your book about how dehumanizing this entire thing made medicine, specifically elderly people isolated in the hospitals. Unbearable. Do you remember these times?
What they said to him. You remember the pictures of them,
was.
separating people were in the hospitals alone, the staff, in schools, the dressed up, all of that. So I was watching this, and I had a feeling, and the feeling was like being in a communist nation. So when I was a young girl, I traveled a little bit with my family, and we went to Yugoslavia, and I also spent about a half a day in East Berlin. It was I was only 12, I think. But there's a certain feeling, if you've ever been in a communist nation, I never even articulated the words, but I felt that feeling in 2020. And I was like, oh, it's communism. It's communism. Like, that's what's here. Because communism, it was like the collective is more important than the individual. And always in my career and in my life, the individual is really important. And all of a sudden, the individual, it didn't matter. And then we saw that get worse and worse after the shots were released, right? Like the unvaxxed, you know, who's the comedian who said, right over here, you know, they could die. Like I think it was Jimmy Kimmel. It's like, yeah, you know, they can die. I mean, who says stuff like that? I was an ER doctor. I'm not joking. I've worked at hospitals that had prison contracts. I have absolutely taken care of mass murderers. That's the truth. The machete, there was a machete murderer, right? And he was my patient one time. I mean, like, we never said things like, we're not taking care of that guy. That never happened in medicine.
Of course not. No, and I remember in Germany, geimpft ins Gas, unvaccinated into the gas. I mean, this was communism, this was Nazism, this was totalitarianism in its uttermost ugly. And you were right, just face to face with this.
So I would say starting around March, April, I took a few months to really look at the science, right? I said, well, maybe this is the only virus that I've ever heard about that's acting this way. Like, I gave it a month or 2, 3.
In the history of all viruses,
right?
yeah.
But I was being like a careful doctor. Like, maybe this is the bubonic plague. And yes, John Strand said I didn't believe it for 1 second. I'm not saying I believed it, but I'm saying I'm supposed to be responsible
You're
and
a scientist.
give it a few minutes. So I gave it probably through March. Okay, but I knew the PCR testing was very corrupted. That was 100%. And I knew most of the times it was mild. But I thought, well, okay, so I was cautious maybe through March, but by April, I was so alarmed. And then the letter comes from the California, you know, basically Newsom, California Medical Board, and I said, I have to really organize doctors here because I can't be the only one. And that's what led to my organizing doctors was I was just looking, I knew there had to be other doctors, right? I couldn't be the only one. And that's what led to forming America's Frontline Doctors.
And then you had your White Coat Summit on the steps of the Supreme Court. What was it that inspired, what propelled you from organizing doctors to this incredible event?
Do people here remember that? They remember saying, okay, that was good, yeah. So sometimes people ask me, you know, did I know what would happen? So I was just, you know, living a nice life here in Beverly Hills and working, and right? And then, but I'm getting more and more agitated by what I'm seeing. So I decide that we have to do something, we have to speak out. So I said, well, let's have doctors talk directly to the people, right? Let's bypass the media, because obviously the media was lying. Not only do we kind of know generally that the media lies, let me give you a specific example, right? I'm not really very political. I have my own beliefs, they are politically conservative, but I wouldn't say I'm overly political. Yeah. So starting in May, I started getting put together with different people in the press, and we ended up having a press conference by Zoom. Ever hear of such a thing? Press conference by Zoom. But like there was maybe 50 papers there. It was a huge kind of press conference. So the Associated Press reporter follows up with some questions for me, and he tells me that he's heard that I'm on the short list to be something with the Trump administration. And I'm like, oh, wow. I was like, he says, well, he just wants to confirm that with me. I'm like, no, absolutely not. I said, no one has ever said anything like that to me. Well, no, I have it. I definitely have a good authority that you're definitely on the short list. I'm like, and I'm thinking to myself, well, that sounds cool, right? but I've never heard of such a thing.
Yeah.
So I kept saying that to them. No, I've never heard of that. And then I said, but I would be honored to be considered. But I'd never heard of such a thing. So when he writes his newspaper article, what he writes was, and Dr. Gold, who denied being part of the Trump administration. Some sentence like that. And I was like, oh, they're so dishonest. Like, I said we were a grassroots physicians organization, and he just pretended it was political. So now half the nation didn't want to hear from us. And all of a sudden I was a quack, and all of a sudden I was political. We were really apolitical. If you watch the summit, absolutely. There were doctors, Dr. Bob Hamilton, some of you may know him, in Santa Monica, and Dr. Stella Emanuel. We were just frontline doctors that were speaking truth, and we were portrayed immediately by a dishonest media that we were overly political, which we weren't as a group. We never really came out and spoke out again on anything political.
Yeah.
We kept to our lane.
Well, yes and no. You kept to the medical lane, but the medical lane was
Expanded.
completely exploited for their
Right.
purpose, right?
But we were entirely grassroots.
But you were.
We decided, my whole vision was, let's go and speak to the American people directly because the media is so dishonest. But we didn't know how big it would be. So, one day I'm working as an ER physician, which I've trained to do like all of my life. And it's, by the way, it's a pretty good career. I liked it. I was making good money. It was good. Yeah. And then we do our White Coat Summit. And I didn't sleep, personally, I didn't sleep for 48 hours. It was just, the world had exploded. That was a Monday. It happened coincidentally on Wednesday. There was a big tech subcommittee hearing in Congress, and Zuckerberg was in the hot seat, and they asked Zuckerberg about me directly. And why did you censor the doctors? Why did you censor Dr. Gold? And he said something like, they're spreading disinformation. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like it was very obvious. I got fired from my jobs as an ER physician. I don't talk about it that much because I don't like to exploit things, but I was just a do-gooder. Like, I was literally working for a Native American reservation. People in this room don't know that. So I was doing that 1 week a month, living on a Native American site south of Tucson. And then I was also working here in Los Angeles, and both hospitals loved me, and they both fired me immediately. And I remember thinking, it's kind of scary. What I trained for was very specific, right? Is to be a hospital doctor. I mean, I wasn't really going to go out and open up an office. It was scary. Like, it's honestly very scary to just get fired like out of nowhere. On the other hand, it was nothing I would have ever changed or regretted because I couldn't live in the world of lies. It was complete lies from top to bottom. Anything you think you thought, this is a room that was awake, but I can't think of anything that we were told in the COVID years that was true. I can't think of one. 6 foot social distancing, completely made up. It was also made up so that the schools would be closed because schools couldn't stay open with that degree. Most schools didn't have that kind of room. It was a very specific thing. They had Fauci on the stand in the Senate in January of 24, and he admitted it was totally fabricated. CDC director said that as well. And I can't think of a single thing that was said that was true. And that's what is so concerning. Who's the person who said, if you can make people believe absurdities, you can make them commit atrocities. So that's my perspective.
So someone Google that, because I remember that you cite
Yeah.
that. It's absolutely,
It was
it's absolutely
Stalin's.
true.
Yeah, it was Stalin's chief KGB. Somebody who
Right.
worked for Stalin.
Was it
Beria,
Beria?
yeah,
That's right. And they had us doing the most completely insane things. Do you remember pictures during COVID of kids in class with the plexiglass, or my favorite that destroys me is playing musical instruments through cutouts of masks, and then running, doing sports with swimming. It was completely insane, and it struck me at the time as just a way of seeing what kind of ludicrousness we were going to put up with, and it was an awful lot, but it wasn't you.
Yeah, to this day, if you had said to me in 2019 how many people would be willing to fight back for their nation, I probably would have said 30%. And maybe you could have talked me down to 10%, but I never would have thought it would have been less than 1%.
Right.
I don't even think it was 1% that were willing to fight back, that were willing to say no. And these were very absurd things, very, very absurd things. Maybe some of you wore the masks, maybe you didn't know, but what about the doctors who knew? Doctors have always known masks don't work for tiny respiratory viruses. There's not a doctor who ever went to medical school who ever thought they worked. We know they work for big things like spit, okay? They work for blood. They work for big things. They don't work. So to see doctors wearing masks was incredible to me. And then I kept waiting for the American people to say no. I kept waiting for, like the men who stormed Normandy, and they had evaporated from the American population. And it's probably too much to go into, but just to have an insight into how my brain works, it was very obvious to me that this was also a war on masculinity, which has been going on now for 2 or 3 generations, right? Because if any society doesn't have strong men to protect it, we will collapse by invasion or some other mechanism. But you looked around and you would see 22-year-old men who have a mask and a plexi shield in front of their face, and you're thinking, well, they're not storming the beach. Like,
No.
we're not trusting those guys. So there was a confluence of a lot of things that I felt that if we didn't say something, we would never be able to say again.
Right.
We would never have that chance. And I do think courage is also contagious. I didn't stand up to make other people courageous.
Right.
I stood up because I couldn't stand it. So, there you go.
Yeah,
And I got
and it is contagious. And I know you definitely got punished. We'll talk about that. But I just want to. There was a meme that went around in the very beginning that said, our forefathers stormed Normandy to save America. All we're asking you to do is stay home and sit on the couch. And it was, do you remember? I mean, it was just a completely shocking thing. And Heather McDonald talks about how this was really evidence of the feminization of culture that this happened, and that's what you're saying.
For sure, and you had touched on also, as a female, as a doctor, like the cruelty I thought was incredible. So I gave it a name, and I call it casual cruelty.
Yes.
We're just kind of being very casually cruel to people. We're saying to them, stay home until you're blue, or, die alone, right? Nursing home patient, oh, poor them. I mean, do you guys know how many people the governor of New York killed? Cuomo? I mean, it's in the hundreds of thousands, for sure. He had policies in place. I'm going to shock you when I tell you this. So, obviously, there were people who got very sick with COVID, and they were frail people who typically had 4 comorbidities. Old age itself wasn't a terrible comorbidity. Diabetes was really the worst, but certainly being very elderly was a risk factor. So who is at risk? Were nursing home patients. That was the group that was really at risk. So, and COVID certainly was contagious. So what did Cuomo do? When a patient went from the nursing home to the hospital with COVID, first, let me back up. Whenever a person goes from one medical institution to another medical institution, the nurse at the first medical institution has to call the nurse at the second, at the receiving, and give report. It's a nursing report. Tell you how Ms. Smith is doing, and this is how it went, and we're going to send Ms. Smith back. That's just normal operating procedure. What happened during COVID? Cuomo passed a regulation, an order, an EO, I guess, and said that the hospital nurse could not disclose to the receiving nursing home nurse if the patient had had COVID or not. It was a specific executive order that he did. And his ostensible reason was, the nursing homes would be prejudiced and wouldn't want to take their patients back, which is a load of malarkey because they're basically covered by insurance and they're happy to keep the beds. But even if it was true, do you remember that there were those big empty boats?
Yes.
The Jacob Javits Center was empty, and the boat the
Mercy.
Yeah,
And
was empty. So if you really were worried that the nursing home was going to not take the patient back, put them on the boat, make a boat a COVID boat, or Jacob Javits. No. What he said was, you can't tell if they had COVID or not. So they sent back COVID positive, frail nursing home patients to a frail nursing home environment, and scores of people died. It's all, Dr. Peter Breggin, Breggin, wrote about it. He did the best expose on it, and he's probably, if we're lucky, he's going to be the next mayor of New York. Right? If you're lucky, he's better than the alternative.
Oh, yeah. Oh, certainly.
No, I mean, I don't know what to say. Like, I'm serious. Like, if we're lucky, he's going to be the next
Yeah.
mayor.
And-
A guy who should be in prison for the rest of his life hanging from a tree. I don't know.
Oh, truly. But let's remember, though, the ships. Remember who brought in the ships? Trump. So that can't be. You can't, TDS, as you mentioned, you can't possibly go down any path that President Trump mentioned. It's aquarium cleaner, it's bleaching your, right?
Yeah, so
Everything
I
that he
want
mentioned was...
So, and it is Trump derangement syndrome, but it's also very anti-life. And I'm going to bring it back to something very current. So Secretary Kennedy, you all probably saw the story a couple of weeks ago. The New York Times did an expose that some organ transplant donors were still alive when they were doing the surgery to take the organs. So the New York Times broke the story. So within hours, Kennedy actually was really bold and said, we're looking into this. And then he decides to change the organ transplantation program, right? Why am I talking about this? So you have an expose by the New York Times, which is basically doing the right thing. Oh my God, they're like doing this terrible, heinous thing. Kennedy's like, well, we're not going to allow this. And he said some very affirmative, like, this violates human dignity, right? Totally agree. What happens? The New York Times, 10 days later, does an op-ed by 3 doctors who work for Northwell Medical in New York, saying, did you see the headline? It said, donor organs are scarce. Maybe we need a new definition of death.
That's right. It was shocking.
So I'm bringing this full circle for a couple of reasons. You had a scenario where the left on the New York Times and now Kennedy agree, oh my God, this thing is terrible. Well, that can't be. They can't possibly agree with Kennedy, right? So they literally do an entire 180, and they'd say, oh no, we got to have a new definition of death. And by the way, the New York Times, so I'm explaining to you that it's very, very anti-life. Yeah. Very anti-life. It doesn't matter if they're old or they're young, they're very anti-life. And by the way, the doctors who wrote that op-ed, I had to look this up. They work for one of the largest transplant regional centers in the Northeast. Not disclosed in the op-ed. So I point all of that out to say, yes, it was Trump derangement syndrome, but it was kind of more than that. They're just very anti-life. Yeah. They're very anti-life. Your life, what does it matter? Your life, what does it matter? What does it matter? And that's what I felt in 2020. And frankly, I call it communism, fascism, tyranny, whatever. It's all the same. Either the individual matters or the individual is just subordinate to the collective. And I'm going to say every day for the rest of my life that the individual really, really matters.
Amen. And just before we pivot to January 6th, not only were all the measures that they recommended, mandated, at least not helpful and not safe, but also dangerous, but there were things one could do that would be helpful and curative and preventative. So everything was completely topsy-turvy, just to your point about it was completely anti-health and anti-Hippocratic oath.
That is such an important point because I don't want people to think this is only about Trump or politics. There's a very strong anti-life side on the other side. Let me give you some easy examples. The biggest risk factor if you came down with SARS-2 was if your glucose level was high. Another pretty important risk factor is if your vitamin D level was low. Did anybody ever talk about that? Did you ever hear an article about that? Now, if you have diabetes, you know in general you should keep your sugar controlled, right? But even if you didn't know you had diabetes or you had it and it was undiagnosed, when you got SARS-2, if you kept your glucose very tightly controlled, you did much better. Oh my gosh, that doesn't cost a penny. That's not political. Why was that not the front page news everywhere you went? Right. Okay? And vitamin D was very important. Most of the people who were in the ICU with COVID had low vitamin D levels. So this is just an example that it's bigger than Trump and it's bigger than politics. Deuteronomy, choose life. Choose life. Choose life. We choose life. There you go. And I don't know what else to say about that. It's not an abortion conversation. I'm not talking about that. Right. I'm saying that if there's a human being in front of you, that human being actually matters.
Yeah.
The other side doesn't think so.
So you went to the Capitol for January 6th, not in protest, nothing about election integrity, but because you were so systemically silenced that you seized any opportunity to speak. So you were invited to speak at the Capitol January 6th. I went because you were on the list and various other people. I wanted to support you and everyone taking a stand against all the lunacy. So you went there to speak. What happened?
This is reason enough to buy the book. I hope everyone buys the book because it's like the craziest story. It's just absolutely crazy. First of all, I was an invited guest speaker, right, which many people here don't know. I was invited to be there. I had a permit to be on the Capitol grounds. So that's actually why I was there. I was there with a permit to speak. Now, the day went really bizarrely, obviously. to say the least, and nothing went as planned, and they weren't letting the speaker speak. I was due to speak. There were about 4 congressmen in the group I was speaking with. I mean, Lauren Boebert was on that list, Paul Gosar was on that list, I'm trying to think, Roger Stone was on that list, a bunch of people. It was a very esteemed group, and that's why I was there. But anyway, the day didn't go as planned, but I was on a mission. I would say for 2 years, 2020, 2021, and halfway through 22, I almost had a compulsion to speak on this, to speak about the health aspect, because I was so offended that they were hiding the truth from people. I have children, one of my children, believe me, one didn't. I mean, this was pervasive, and I knew every family pretty much was going through the same thing. So I just felt an urgency to speak. There was nothing that was going to stop me. So even when they canceled the talks, I'm like, well, I'm speaking, you're not going to stop me. And that's what I did. So I stood there and I spoke. That was the extent of what I did, but I was there. I was on Capitol grounds. And I have to tell you, like, John was with me. Peaceful, of course, it's like goes without saying. People said this was an insurrection. I mean, they said it to me like a day or two later. I'm like, what are you talking about? Not at all. They were like grandma singing Kumbaya. Like, what are you talking about? Like, it was so not what was portrayed. Now, we find out years later that a lot of cell phone video that people were taking was suppressed by tech companies, right? So people were shooting videos, as we do, and the tech companies were not transmitting them. So most people in America didn't know, other than what the media told them. The lawyers I ended up hiring, because I ended up, of course, getting arrested for being present, was conservative, right? I hired conservative lawyers. My lawyer, a year after knowing me, we got into a conversation, and he said how many people were there, or something, and he says to me there were 30,000 people. I was like, 30,000 people? I said, there was 1.5 million, and I would only lower it to 1 million. Like, that's the lowest I'll go. So the news reports were saying 30,000, to the point that even my politically conservative attorneys thought it was 30,000. No. 1 million is completely different than 30,000. No one can get those two numbers confused. So you all were being told something that was utterly false. Right. Utterly false. And I mean, there's so much to talk about that day, but it was just, for those of you who don't know, so 12 days after January 6th, I'm working, I had a condo on Oakhurst. You all know Oakhurst, right around the corner. And I hear this blood-curdling, FBI, like screaming. And I was I was like, well, that can't be the FBI. That must be like a Columbia cartel. Like, because if it was the FBI, they would have called me. I just couldn't believe it. I remember thinking someone's coming to murder me. Definitely can't open the door because someone's coming to murder me. That's totally what I thought. I remember thinking, well, I'm not opening the door because the Columbia cartel is here. I thought it was kind of strange they were in Beverly Hills, but that's what I thought. That's really what I thought. And then while I'm sitting there for like 30 seconds or 60 seconds trying to process like what this was, they scream it again, and I'm like, oh, maybe it is the FBI, I guess, maybe. And I stand up, and at the moment, basically, I stand up, and it was a small place. They break down the door with a battering ram, and in rushes in 20 officers in tactical gear, SWAT tactical gear, black, the bulletproof, and the sweat down their face, and their fingers on the big, huge rifles, and the laser sight beams pointed at my chest. And I'm thinking to myself, this is very strange. And I couldn't quite process it. Now, I'm very good in emergencies. I rarely get like flummoxed. I'm like, this is very strange. But it wasn't making sense to me. And I said something like, hands up, hands up. And I was a little confused. And I take a step forward because it didn't make sense. And I think about that a lot because this officer, there were 20 of them, but there was one in charge. He was essentially primed to shoot me dead. He has adrenaline coursing through his veins. He's been told by the FBI or the Department of Justice that he's going to get a really hardened criminal because you don't call a SWAT team unless you're a member of a drug cartel, unless you have a history of violence, unless you've been incarcerated before with all kinds of problems. If you go down the list and you see the reasons to call a SWAT team, they're very articulated. They're enumerated. So he's been told that, and that's why he's there. So if I'm stepping forward, I'm likely to be resisting arrest and a threat to him. And I'm very lucky he didn't shoot me dead. And you know who else is lucky? He's lucky. Because if he went into the police department, if that's his career, he didn't want to shoot a person like me. He would have read about me later. He'd be like, oh my God, she's a doctor, she's a lawyer, she's a mom, she's got kids, she's a civil rights activist. I killed her. Yeah. So this is like kind of a setup where, you know, they're setting things up where they're counting on the guy on the ground to just follow orders. He ends up in a terrible situation. They've primed him to make it likely that someone like me, by their definition, a dissident, is killed. That's what's going on. And in a less dramatic way, I saw that in the hospitals during the COVID years, right? They're telling the nurses, just keep the family out. I know that grandma's dying and she's been married 65 years to the same man, but her husband can't come in. So I witnessed that. That's what I mean by casual cruelty. They're taking our American citizens' concern for each other, and they're saying, don't care about that person over there. Don't care about that person. That's what I meant about we're training our people to be cruel, to be casually cruel, to not pay attention. And I'm sorry, it's very un-American, in my opinion.
Well, and the aggression has been twisted. The aggression, so there's the casual cruelty, but the aggression towards the unvaxxed and unmasked. And then in the next phase of your story is the aggression towards you as a dissident. For the FBI, what has to happen to our government agencies for you to have been cast in such a role that beating down your door, all these people coming in, training, having a red dot on you because it's a laser sight from some kind of, I don't know. Now, how did, it's a full-on inversion. The good guys became the bad guys for you to be cast in such a light that getting you shot dead was highly likely.
So when I realized what was happening, I got very calm, got very zen. And, you know, my ER doctor kicked in. And I'm cool as a cucumber. And as they're taking me, so as they're taking me shackled, handcuffed, perp walked in front of the neighbors in Beverly Hills, right? That's a delightful experience. So as this is happening, and then we're sitting in the car for like 2 hours, and they're driving me, and I'm looking at the driver. He's like a young kid, and I'm looking at him in the rearview mirror, and his name is Caleb, which is a nice biblical name. So I just kind of took a chance, and I said, "Do you know why you're arresting me?" And he's like, "No, ma'am." And I said, "Well, someday," I said, "you look pretty young." I said, "Someday in your life, you're going to have a moment that you're going to have to make a decision what to do." I said, for me, and this is I didn't write it in the book. I said, so I've been an ER doctor a long time, and there was a day in the ER that I had to give a person medicine that would save her life. And when I did that, my boss called to tell me that they're going to fire me. And I said, that led to today. I said, so I want you, Caleb, to recognize in your life when this happens, because you've chose law enforcement as a career, and now you've gone and you've seen what happened to someone like me, and you need to think about it. And that's just, I share that, it's kind of a personal story because I want everyone to do that in your own life. All of us are, nobody in here is a spring chicken, nobody here is like 20, right? We all have opportunities to make those connections for younger people because younger people are growing up not knowing these things. He's 25, he's part of the FBI, he's seeing this unfold, his superiors are telling him it's okay to bust in the door of a very peaceful person. So I was the person who made the connection for him. Whoa, maybe that's not what it seems. And I actually encourage everybody to do that because the younger people actually don't even know.
They don't know.
Yeah, so it's very dramatic and interesting, everything that I went through from J6. And I sort of chuckle because everything would have been different if I hadn't actually been invited to speak on J6. I would have just been a quack. I wouldn't have been an insurrectionist.
So are you glad about what happened, right? Are you glad? Because it put you on quite an extraordinary path. I hadn't really thought to ask this, but are you glad that you were invited to speak?
So, no. If I could wave a magic wand, I would really wish I was not present that day. But we, I guess, cannot escape our destinies, and I do think being a doctor and a lawyer has really informed my ability to share what happened to me. And the reason I wrote this book in particular is, and the reason I took so much time, this book was 2.5 years in the writing. I mean, it took a very long time. It's because I really can see how every ordeal I went through was so illegal, like massively illegal. You know, the FBI, the fact that their criteria for sending a SWAT team in was totally violated. The fact that the Department of Justice attorneys lied 100%, like total proof. You read the book, you saw total proof. So I think I was uniquely able to write a book like this, which stands as a historical record. But, you know,
So,
if I could wave a magic wand, I would rather have my life back.
right. But sorry it was you, but on the other hand, you really were exactly the person for literally, again, we've heard this, for such a time as this. There were both of these institutions, the medical/science and our judiciary, our legislative branch, both of which are so fundamental to our entire everything, have been so completely distorted. You were chosen somehow. Sorry, but
And
you were it.
we'll do some like some lighthearted things. So this is one of the things I reveal in the book, and maybe one or two people here know this. So when I was told that, you know, I was arrested and we're doing all these hearings on Zoom, so my judge, I think you know where I'm going with this. So my judge is a fellow named Christopher Cooper. So I was like, okay, it doesn't mean anything to me. And my lawyer said, as far as DC judges go, he's solid, whatever that means. So she said that, you know, they're all terrible. They're all terrible, but this one at least is intelligent. I was like, okay. So the first day comes along, and I'm in the Zoom hearing, and it turns out that's Casey Cooper. Casey Cooper was a classmate of mine at Stanford Law School. Okay, so I'm thinking to myself, and I'm quickly like, so I'm not with my lawyer. I'm over here in California. She's over here in DC, and I'm like, oh, Casey, oh yeah, no, Casey and I went on a couple of dates. This is good. He likes me. It was good. This is what I'm thinking, like, when the Zoom hearing is happening. I'm like, so my lawyer's quickly like, do you want to try to get him? I'm like, no, I think maybe it's a good thing, you know? Like, I think maybe it's a good, like, I hadn't seen him in 25 years, but, like, I think it's maybe a good thing. Like, it's not a bad thing. We didn't end badly. Okay. But I remember thinking, it's a little weird, like, he should recuse himself, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of weird, right? Okay. But that was my mindset. The day of sentencing comes, and he was so, and that's the first time I'm seeing him in person, he was so aggressively angry and furious and infuriated with me, like over the top. And I remember thinking, this is a little bit strange. To this day, I can't tell you if it had anything to do from knowing him in the past, but what I can say for sure is that the standard for judge to recuse themselves is the appearance of impropriety. You don't recuse yourself just if it's definitely inappropriate, but if it looks inappropriate. Well, we were 2 of 147 students together in the same law school class. There's no pretense that we didn't know each other. I still can't believe the arrogance of these judges, that they just do what they like. So then, of course, after all this happened, I looked up his past, and there's a whole chapter on him here, because it turns out he's so arrogant, he doesn't recuse himself from things he should recuse himself from. He and his wife were married by Merrick Garland. That's okay. They're as deep state as you get. I'm sorry, that's a fact. Now, that's not a reason to recuse himself, but when you look at his history and his past, he didn't recuse himself from a situation where he was being judged. I mean, I mention these things because you asked, you know, if I like regretted being there or think it was maybe the right thing that I was there, because I have the capacity to write about how illegal and over the top it is for these judges to be so arrogant. They don't follow the rules, and nobody punishes them for not following the rules. So it's very clear. I bring all the receipts in the book. I show all of the records, why they're not doing this, why they're not getting punished. And that's why the book is Selective Persecution. They persecuted me, but is the legalization of American fascism. Because you have a judiciary that is so above it all, they don't even think they're going to get into trouble if the judge is judging someone who he dated in school. I think that that's outrageous, that they're not even concerned about it. That's the most mild story that's in the book.
Yeah, the book is absolutely extraordinary. It will blow your mind. Not only is it full of horrors, but it really is a page turner. I mean, you're just flipping through it, going, I just can't. It brings one back to the lunacy, but then also just so surpasses all of this. And when I saw the subtitle, The Legalization of American Fascism, there's so much language that one feels is a little bit hysterical, it's a little bit over the top. Is it an overstatement? It is not. So why
this book is so precise. I think if you've listened to me over the years, you have noticed that I don't say things that are inaccurate. I don't think you can point to anything I've ever put out that is inaccurate. My speeches from 5 years ago are completely accurate today. I'm very cautious in how I put things out on social, very accurate. The reason this took such a long time, there's actually 600 plus references in here. Every single thing I say has been checked, fact-checked, double-checked. So I did that because I want people to see it's not just that the FBI didn't follow its own internal rules. It's also that the judiciary is not following the rules. It's also that the public health officials violated every standard of public health policy. It's also, my favorite chapter in the book, quite frankly, is when I write about my time in prison and the other women in prison. The BOP, the Bureau of Prison, it's just like the CDC. It's just another federal agency that's out for money. And to, it's really dramatic. So I was put, I think, in a place to write about these things, to explain it. But I wanted people to see that like the infrastructure is really there, and we have a reprieve for sure right now. Like I'm glad I don't think I'm going to be arrested tomorrow, so that's good. But I'd like the system to change, right? I'd like this infrastructure for tyranny, and I want to give some positive examples. So a fellow that came after me about a year or 2 years ago, Joyce, you've heard Dr. Hyam, like the surgeon, Dr. Hyam. So for those of you who follow the transgender nonsense, so Dr. Eitan Hyam was a surgeon who spoke up and pushed back in Texas, right? So in response for his troubles, the Department of Justice targeted him massively, and they put him, on trial and all of those things. And he was about to go to trial, but Trump comes into office, and so all of a sudden, right, the DOJ was ordered to drop it. So overnight, they dropped it. I'm bringing this story up because obviously that's a win, the tide is turning, but his wife is a young lawyer. And his wife now was picked up by the Texas Attorney General, Paxton. She's now the Assistant Attorney General investigating health fraud because she was involved in the judge in his situation and the transgender stuff actually put him essentially under a gag order, said he couldn't talk about it, which is outrageous. So she started talking about it. So she's a smart, young lawyer. And now she's been picked up to be in charge of healthcare fraud in Texas. So I'm sharing with you, there are ways to turn back this infrastructure. You have to have different people in charge. So that's what the book is about, is to expose you all can see what I've seen.
We love hearing positive stories. I have to confess, when you said she was picked up, I got a little frisson of, oh no. But that is great. When we spoke the other day, so there's a Parisia episode, our podcast, where I talked to Dr. Gold. And one of the things that I asked then, and I think I want to ask it again, through all of that we went through, you went through, one has the lessons learned or the experiences, it could go one of two ways. We could be weakened by the experience, not individually, but collectively. As a country, we could be more cowed, more bowed, more less reluctant to more reluctant to stand up. Or we could take the lessons, as you did, for example, not necessarily to fight for the good of the country, but just to take a stand, because we've learned that as individuals, if we stand for what's right, again, more of us wind up feeling empowered. Do you think we are stronger for what I know you are, but do you think as a nation we're stronger?
So I think that we've had a collective experience where it will be harder to pull this again, because those people like me will never give up. We're more effective and we get it. And there's a lot of people that have experienced the government lying to them. Everybody knows somebody a lot of people know people who had a vaccine side effect, for example, but everybody knows people who got COVID or themselves got COVID after the shots, right? So everybody in this nation has experienced for themselves the government lying. That's probably good, right? So years ago, who was the quote vaccine hesitant? The quote vaccine hesitant often were black people. Yep. Why? Because they experienced government lying to them, like more than white people did. So we now have all experienced the government lying to us. In that sense, we're more awake, and that makes us better. But I'm not so encouraged by the strength of the American personality. We need better role models. Pete Hegseth it's fantastic that he is where he is, because, people enrolling in the military has gone up just because they're seeing that. So the more of that, the better. But I am a little nervous, for America. So I'm mixed. We'll see.
All right, fair enough. But we're all hearing you, so we're feeling empowered by your example.
Sure.
Absolutely. And John, and I know there's a lot of people here we've stood up in our own way, but you're certainly a model for us to follow.
Nobody should feel pessimistic about what I'm saying, because you have to do this, what you have to do anyway. You always have to do the right thing. Paraphrasing Jordan Peterson very badly, no one can speak like he does. But he said, in any given scenario, the thing that happens is the best thing that could happen. Like, what I went through was terrible, but it was certainly better than lying all the time or killing a patient. Like, all I have to do is just let that person die and not give them this life-saving medicine. I mean, what kind of option is that? That's not an option. So people like me who've gone through the fire, I'm stronger. And the other thing is I want a role model, like, I'm happy. You know what I mean? Like, you look at what happened to me, you think, oh my God, that's dreadful, it's dreadful. No, I'm good. So like, you should be more empowered. You shouldn't be so afraid. You shouldn't be afraid of what your friends will say. If there's one thing I can tell people, stop being afraid of what other people think or say. Just it's not even worth it.
Right.
So
and you said do the right thing because it's the right thing.
There's no choice. First of all, if you believe in God, there's no choice. But even if you don't believe in God, why do you want to silence yourself? What a terrible way to live. It's so awful to self-censor, right? You're living always like, it's not a good way to live.
Absolutely right. Well, thank you so much. Truly.
By the way, there's so many details that have happened to me over the last few years. So I realized we didn't even talk about 99% of it.
So much. There's so truly, read this. It's phenomenal.
Yeah. First of all, newsflash, when they talk about a plea agreement, it's not at all what I thought. I thought a plea agreement is when you have a negotiation. No. Plea agreement is the government hands you a piece of paper, take it or leave it. That was surprising to me in and of itself. So they offered me the plea agreement of accepting what is essentially a trespass. So there was no choice about it. Now, the reason I accepted it, and you really do have to read this book, they charged people like me with a 20-year felony. 20-year felony. I actually had no intention of taking a plea. I was going to take my chances on trespass, which they shouldn't have charged me with either. And if you read the book, you will understand why I say that, with the depth that I say that. There's probably lawyers in this room. The vertical overcharging is unbelievable when they charge you with higher than you've done. And the horizontal overcharging, where they charge you with multiple charges for one event, shouldn't have happened. And in addition, a political protest never results in charges like this, period, and all the receipts are here. But the government leveled a 20-year felony. I'm a physician, I'm an attorney, I've got professional licenses. I absolutely could not risk a felony. My lawyers told me, correctly, they're going to convict everyone in DC. Every J6 defendant requested change of venue. 0 got change of venue. There's a lot about that in here too. There was no chance of getting acquitted, and I really didn't think it was fair that I should lose my medical and my legal license. That's what led to my accepting the plea. It's the coercion by the federal government to get a person like me to lie, quite frankly. The tech companies blocked people from transmitting their cell phone videos to each other. So people who would normally have seen videos from their friends or relatives just didn't get them. I don't know what happened to them. They went into some hard drive that Facebook and Instagram have. They existed, people took them, but they never got transmitted. There's always a question about the shots. first of all, I would be not fair to myself if I didn't mention that 3 years ago, I launched a business, Gold Care, goldcare.com. Everyone needs to join because you have access to honest, ethical doctors. They're all my people. It's mine. It's me multiplied. Goldcare.com. It's very inexpensive because I want everyone to join. And we have a COVID vaccine program. But the short answer is I don't think people should live in fear over this if you took the shot, quite frankly. I don't. There are certainly people who had bad effects. That's not debatable. But it is not the majority. We're years past it. You shouldn't, if that's somebody in this room, you should not be living in anxiety like you've got a ticking time bomb inside of you. There are certainly people who had problems. You certainly should not take them. It's bad. It's bad. Verboten. It's poison. It's no good. But you should not live in fear over this.
It's interesting to know what the effect that one had, but I think it's safe to say that every time any of us speaks out, we don't know the effect that we have. We don't sort of need to follow up, but I think it's safe to say that we do have an effect, right?
May I share a funny story? This is a very funny story. I think it's in the book. So I was going off to prison, didn't know what that would be like, and I was kind of scared. I mean, I'm me, so I read a bunch of books about what it would be like to be in prison. But still, I was scared. So in the beginning, they put me in isolation, which is horrific and should be illegal and outlawed, okay? When they put me into general population, though, I was kind of looking out and kind of, trying to get the lay of the land and who's who. And I noticed one woman, and she really kept herself, and she was kind of neat and organized and kind of disciplined, and I just kind of kept my eye on her. After a while, I became kind of friendly with her. Her name is Tara. I talk about her in the book. So about a few weeks into knowing her, I asked her, she knew I was a doctor, and we got to talking about being in isolation, and she told me that she'd been in isolation for 5 months. I can't even imagine. I was in for 8 days. It was intolerable. It's incompatible. I can't imagine it. You think you can, you cannot. It's not possible. I said, why? Because she's very disciplined, that she never got into trouble. I said, why did they put you in isolation for 5 months? She said, I didn't take the shot. I said, oh my. I said, why didn't you, okay, I'm me, but I would have taken the shot rather than go to isolation. I'm just telling you, isolation's horrific. So she said, no, my mother said I would, if I took the shot, she was going to kill me. That's what her mother said. I said, wow, that's pretty unusual. Why did your mother know that? So we start to talking. Her mother follows me. Oh. Her mother was totally a fan of mine. Comes back, she's so excited the next time she sees me. She's like, oh my God, my mother got all this information from you and da-da-da. And she goes through this whole thing. And so you never know how the world goes. It's crazy. And her story is in here, and I don't even want to tell you, there's a connection to Jeff Epstein from that. It's just an unbelievable story and situation where I was put. It was...
Thank you so much. These books are being sold and signed. They are They are $30, but donation, that's the minimum donation that goes to America's Frontline Doctors. You can see the amazing work that Dr. Gold does and all that she has been through and suffered for her pains in terms of standing up for what is right, which turns out to be for all of us, all our constitutional rights, our medical care, our judiciary being legitimate and not hijacked. So huge price.
And I just want to say one more thing because it's a California audience.
Yeah.
I stopped here because I'm due to go to Las Vegas to speak, but I wouldn't miss an opportunity to come and see everybody and for Karen. But I fought for California. So I fled. I live in the free state of Florida now. I'm sorry I had to leave. It was just too much here. But I kept the fight going when California Medical Board came after me for disinformation, and I fought that fight for 3 years. So I'm saying America's Frontline Doctors did that for you because your doctors were being silenced, and I knew that I would be effective, and I won, and it's very difficult to win against these corrupt boards, and I really welcome your donations to America's Frontline Doctors. I have kept my eye on California for that reason. That fight took 3 years. It took about $250,000. But it really set a precedent in California where they're going to think twice before they do this again to a doctor. They came after me for disinformation, and they lost. So that's what donations to America's Frontline Doctors supports.
Thank you, Dr. Gold. Truly.